So this is a tough topic for to have with anybody, especially on a face-to-face, and perhaps on listening to this on a video. And I think can be quite a difficult one to consider and accept. But I think the best way to sort of look at it is perhaps think about us as professional sports people, perhaps a footballer. In our 20s or early 20s, we're making a name for ourselves and we're starting to earn some good money. And as a footballer, perhaps in our middle 20s, we're at the peak of our career, we're performing really well. And we're worth a lot, especially in those Premiership football teams that spend millions and millions of pounds on players. And obviously they earn a lot of money as well. But as they come towards the end of their careers, they've got to perhaps accept they're not going to play as much. They're not going to be quite so important, and therefore their contract isn't going to be quite so good. So in some ways you've got to think about this, and I was always taught this when I was younger, that in your 20s and 30s you've got to think about maximising the opportunities and earning the money and investing it in pensions. Let's not all go into that at the moment. And thinking about the future, but then having the acceptance that in my sort of 40s and into my 50s, it's going to start to come down again, and we've got to manage this. So we do need to consider and accept, are we able to work at the same levels that we used to be able to do? Do we have the same levels of energy? Is our expertise, just as important now as it was then? Is the progressive generations behind us catching us up and, at times taking us over? So have this conversation. And also, do you really want to continue to work at those levels? What about your energy levels? The work-life balance? Working all hours that God sends? Dealing with contacts via messaging and emails, 24/7. So do think about this. Now, do accept that if you still need to have those high wages because of whatever, and I'm not going to go into people's personal circumstances, but if you still do need to earn that amount of money, this can be a very tough situation for us to accept. So we've got to be really good at, getting across the valley that we've got. Otherwise, do actually think, is this now a time for me to step back and start to enjoy it? And actually think, if I'm going to talk about a lesser role and apply for lesser roles, have a damn good story of why you're doing that. Be honest with them, but really work out what your story is. If you are going to go for slightly lesser roles, because people will say, but you're overqualified, you're too experienced. Well, we know that, ages and rules, we know that, but still then think about, based on the previous video, what's the value that you're going to bring to that role, especially if you are dropping down. And also with your CV, perhaps reduce it in the terms of the year's experience. Don't think you've got to go back, the last 20, 30, 40 years on your CV. You can cut this. There again, have some really good conversations with people that in the recruitment industry. There's some great recruitment consultants out there that will give you advice on these areas. If you know when anybody in HR, go and say to them, look, can you give me 20 minutes of your time? I've got some really important questions to ask you about, what I need to sort of think about in terms of, being realistic with my expectations. So you're going to have some tough conversations, and especially if we've been, top of the pile, calling all the shots, making all the decisions, and perhaps coming down a little bit may be difficult. But sometimes we need to put our ego to bed. We're the only ones with the ego in our own heads, so we're the only ones that need to worry about it. Don't worry about what other people think, but just sometimes, have that good story of the reasons of dropping back and perhaps to a lower level. So have these conversations with your network and other people that you know well and see what they think, and then work out what works for you. So that's the third video in this series of 4. The first one was, does ageism rule? The second one, the value that you bring. So if you haven't seen them, please check them out. Obviously, we've just looked at being realistic in your expectations and a lot of conversations to have with ourselves and perhaps other people. And the next video coming up is the great knowledge and experience that we have versus AI and digital processes that we need to embrace. So I look forward to catching you on the next one.